Yeah, it's Risk 360. I love the name. It's a tongue twister. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming back after break. We are getting ready to be wowed by Christian Hyatt, Managing Director and co-founder of Risk 360. Christian is the Managing Director and co-founder of Risk 360, where he has helped hundreds of organizations assess, build, and certify their security and privacy programs. Risk 360 is one of the country's fastest growing boutique cybersecurity consulting firms and three-time winner of Atlanta's fastest growing companies and Atlanta's best places to work. Woo-hoo! Come on up, Christian.
There we go. Thanks, Jess, for the love. We're going to get the presentation up, I think. There we go. So every 5 years at Risk 360, we have the opportunity to take a sabbatical. So I spent the month of July in Yellowstone, and this is my family having a good time at the front there. It's my wife, Lauren, and two very crazy children that kicked the back of my seat for hours upon hours, and made that really fun. If you haven't been to Yellowstone, I highly recommend it. It's absolutely gorgeous. We just spent most of the time driving through the park. So I don't know how the country had the foresight to think to preserve such a place, but I'm thankful they did. So in the park, there's only a couple places that you have cell phone signal. And they happen to be at these places where you can buy food and they're little general stores. So my family and I are driving down and I get a phone call. It happens to be a place where I have cell phone signal, but I am on sabbatical and I'm trying to be a good dad. So I do the right thing, I ignore the call. The person that was calling was a guy named Kevin, who's a CISO for a banking institution. He knows I'm on sabbatical. We talk a lot. So I figure, he probably just forgot. I get a second call. I'm like, okay, that's kind of rude, but Kevin can wait. Ignore it again. We start driving down. I'm about to lose cell phone service. I get a third call. Kevin doesn't call 3 times. Doesn't happen. So I say, pull over. There's buffalo roaming. It's beautiful. I say, hey, I'm going to take this call. You guys look at the buffalo. Don't get trampled. Don't get too close. I want to take this call. So I take the call. Kevin is upset. He works in the mortgage industry and someone just lost $366,000.52. What happened was, if you've ever bought a house, there's a lot of parties involved. So you have to put your routing number on a PDF. You have to work with the lawyer. There's buyers and sellers involved. It goes all over the place. Somewhere along the line, someone captured that routing number and changed it in the PDF. And someone lost $366,000.52 to life savings. So I think we're in a crisis. They say cybercrime costs around $1 trillion in 2020. Some estimates are saying this year is going to be 6.5 trillion, and they're saying 10.5 trillion by 2025. Those are huge numbers. They're bigger than the drug trade, the illegal drug trade, which is crazy. So this got me thinking, why is this happening? What are the challenges? And we do hundreds, we've done nearly 1,000 assessments that we have data on. And I wanted to look at the trends and say, what's going on? Why is this happening? And what can we do about it to improve? And for us at Risk 360, how can we give people data so they can drive action? So we looked at almost 1,000 assessments and we had almost 4,000 findings. So our team collectively has found 4,000 different things across our clients. There's got to be something that we can learn from this. So as I was intro, my name is Christian Hyatt. I'm Managing Director at Risk 360. We do security assessments, and we're fortunate enough to use this platform where we capture all the assessment results as we do them. So I'm going to share the findings with you guys. And I want you to be able to use it to do a couple things. So for one, there's a lot of auditors in the room. If you're thinking about your audit plan come next year, maybe you can integrate this data. This is great risk information areas you can focus. If you're a security person on the security team or a CISO, you have finite resources. These are good areas to invest your focus. If you're seeking certification, like a lot of our clients are, this can be a checklist. I'll share a slide that's very busy at the end that shows you the top 10 findings we had across several different frameworks like SOC 2 and ISO and GDPR. You can take that information to prepare. So what did we find? I'll give you guys a chance to digest this. But we found a lot, and it's a lot across the board. This is loosely based on ISO 27001 categories, but I kind of normalized it into human readable format so that you can guess what I'm talking about by the category. But we had a lot of findings across the board. So with only 50 minutes to talk to you guys, I wanted to narrow it down. So how do we do that? How do we narrow it down just a little bit? So I looked at what was critical and ultimately what could move the needle. What can you guys do to drive change at your organization? And I also noticed a pattern where there's certain things that are very related. So I narrowed it down like this. And I chose these 6 to discuss here, and we're going to talk through each of these. And the way this is going to go is I'll tell you what percentage of our clients were impacted by these based on our analysis, the types of findings that we have, what I think is going on, what's the root cause here, and then we'll talk about solutions. It's probably not surprising here. Strategy and governance. 88% of our clients had findings in this area. 88%. It's almost all of them. So what kind of stuff are we finding? Largely, org structures are not optimized. That's one of the key things. So I'll bet everyone in here can relate to not having a seat at the table, to maybe being in charge of IT, and suddenly you've inherited security as a responsibility. There's sub-optimization. Everybody's firefighting. The board's worried about, the latest headline, but you can't get traction because you don't have a leader at the table to build the program, to be strategic, to talk to the board, to make things happen. Very, very common. The other things are more, I think, the stuff that you see in audit findings all the time, but maybe they don't resonate. So what we see is generally a lack of strategy, specifically a lack of strategy in alignment with the business's business objectives. So as security or auditors or risk professionals, we have to be focused on the business's biggest business problems. You can't just go off a framework or a checklist. Based on what we're seeing, we looked at all of our clients, those who had leaders at the helm who were business first, understood the business's problem, why they're doing what they're doing and how security supports that, were far more successful. They largely do that through risk assessments. And risk assessment is one of those things that people, I think, are tired of hearing about. We do a lot of assessments and we always say you should be doing a risk assessment. And it's kind of eye rolling because it can feel like it's not adding value or driving results. But the best organizations that we've seen do great risk assessments that align security to the business's business objective and can focus their efforts and do strategic planning around that. The last problem we see is a lot of guesswork. So if you're the leader of a security program, how do you measure your results? How do you know if you're doing good or bad? Is it the results of an audit? Is it some other KPI that you've defined? Have you defined a KPI? Most security leaders don't have that. And one interesting thing that we found was that the data showed that the companies who do well here, who have the least amount of findings, perform the best in audits and anecdotally perform the best as a security program. Very important. So in way of solutions, If you guys see these QR codes, feel free to pull your phone out and take a picture of it. It's going to send you guys to a webinar series that we did around designing information security org structures. I think it'd be pretty valuable, so I won't judge you if you pull your phone out and I hear my voice because it's going to pop a YouTube video up. So things you can do. So you're short-staffed, you can't get a lot of resources for information security, you don't have a seat at the table, you got to design your organization structure. And one of the things that I'm going to recommend is if you don't have one, form something like an information risk council. So force your leadership to give you a seat at the table and invite them to the table. Somebody's got it. So information risk council. We've seen this work at organizations, very small, high growth startup tech companies, all the way to really large enterprise organizations. That seems to be very effective. I'm also going to point you guys to something called an information security management system. If you've never heard that term, it's an ISO 27001 concept, and it's like the breakdown of how you design a system of management for a given topic, in this case, information security. And the last two is be very strategic about your risk assessment process and your strategic planning process and how you ask for resources. If you're an auditor, this is a great audit plan. Find out how your leadership is doing this stuff and if they have a seat at the table. So the next few are a little more technical in nature, and they're all interlinked, and I'll tie them back. The asset management. So 77% of our clients had issues around asset management. And this is foundational. You've probably heard that if you can't protect what you don't know exists. So asset management is the foundation for everything else that you're going to build as a security program, because you only have limited resources. You have to protect the most important stuff. So why is this a problem? Why is this happening? Why is asset management such a high percentage? There's an abundance of tools and technology that can solve this problem. It's largely because there's all types of assets. You can have different types of gear. You can have SaaS providers. You can have different data. They live all over the place. There's no one solution that'll solve this. So there's this hodgepodge of solutions that you have to bring to the table to really solve this. And the other problem is ownership. Who owns asset management? Is this an information security problem? Does the CISO own asset management? Or does IT? The folks who are deploying endpoints and deploying infrastructure. So sometimes just that ambiguity in who owns it is tough. Then there's a mix of hardware and software. So there's software assets, things that live on your laptops, different applications that you're using. You have infrastructure, cloud infrastructure, on-prem infrastructure. The list goes on. So this is a tough technical problem to solve, even though there's a lot of tools. So solutions. I think the first thing is you have to identify what's important, and that kind of harkens back to your risk assessment process. You're probably not going to be able to inventory everything unless you're a very small organization that does no M&A. So you have to identify what are those things that you really need to inventory. And that's probably your most important data, your public facing assets, things like that. And then focus all of your efforts there. That's going to mitigate the most risk for you. You're also going to need to consider different solutions in automation. I can't tell you how many times at Risk 360 we've been engaged to do like a data inventory for an organization, and their desired deliverable is an Excel spreadsheet of different servers and applications and what data lives on there. It can be done, but it's out of date before we hand over the Excel spreadsheet. So you really need to consider like asset discovery, data discovery tools, automation. This stuff's not expensive, it's relatively low complexity, and it's completely doable for most organizations, especially if you can target those assessment activities to where you suspect important stuff lives. If you guys are looking for a good control framework, CIS is one of my favorite kind of practical security frameworks, and they change it almost every year, but asset management is always 1 and 2, hardware and software. And that's because I think they've rightly identified that as foundational to the program. 40% do not do well when it comes to vulnerability and patch management. I think this is actually a really low number. I have reasons why I think our Our data is probably, there's a sampling bias. We do a lot of cloud companies. So I think that's probably why. If you were to look at enterprise companies, I don't think there's one out there doing this perfectly. It's almost impossible to do that. So this, what vulnerability and patch management is this cycle you get in scanning systems to identify potential vulnerabilities and then fixing the vulnerability in patch management. Some of the numbers I could find said 60% of all breaches were the result of unpatched systems. I think that's, if anything, low. Some of the challenges here are the variety of systems that you have to scan. It comes back to asset management. What are you scanning and patching? Well, only the stuff you know exists. You probably have a ton of vendors. There's Cisco, there's Microsoft. Most of us are afraid to install a Microsoft update on our endpoint. Imagine if you had a system that required really high availability that millions of users use, and you want to install a patch on it. There's some anxiety that goes along with that. And the other thing that we saw was a lot of companies are scanning. They're doing vulnerability scans, but they're not fixing the issues. The issues just pile up and they're not being resolved. So some of the solutions. So to drive this point home, I'm going to beat up on someone who's been beat up plenty, which is Equifax. You can see in the after action report, it was a lack of a patch system. And that's not surprising. This could happen to anybody. But if you imagine the complexity of an enterprise organization that has literally thousands of pieces of infrastructure that have to be patched all the time, there's probably advanced persistent threats that are monitoring at any given time, trying to exploit those vulnerabilities. It's no wonder that this is a problem. I also want to encourage you guys to think like a hacker for a minute. So at Risk 360, we have this team called Renegade Labs, and I had a really good conversation with the guy who heads our lab practice about thinking like a hacker and who is the adversary out there. So I think we're past the point of believing that the adversary is a guy in a hoodie in the basement, but I don't think we're quite to a point where we appreciate how sophisticated these organizations are. They're businesses. They're businesses with training programs, with HR, with recruiting programs, with very specific playbooks on how to execute against vulnerabilities. They even have affiliate programs. A lot of these ransomware you see were developed by one organization and deployed by another, and there was a revenue sharing model between the two. And they have official affiliate programs that are documented. So why does that matter? That matters because these playbooks aren't special. These people aren't inventing brand new vulnerabilities to execute. Sometimes they are, but on average, they're not. They're looking for widely known vulnerabilities out in the wild that are easy to exploit on some system that you forgot to patch. And they're out there. They know they are. Why would they invent something new when they can just exploit something? So some of the challenges, how do you solve this? There's an abundance of vulnerability scanning tools and patch management tools, but it's going to come back to your risk assessment. What's important to you? How can you narrow down your efforts and really focus on the stuff that matters? Choose a great tool that you prefer. There's an abundance of them, and get in that habit of scanning and patching. Access control, every auditor's favorite. 78%. This one I don't think surprises anyone. Access is notoriously difficult to keep a handle on for various reasons, and it's also relatively easy to audit. So if an audit report has a finding on it, it's probably around access control. Why is that the case? It's a growing number of systems. You have SaaS applications, you have infrastructure, cloud infrastructure, you just acquired a company, now there's new systems. You have people who acquire access over time and it's never removed. All sorts of things. A couple of things I want to focus in on. Administrative access. I think everyone's aware of why that's a problem, so I won't beat a dead horse on that one. But engineering and key management. Our number one finding across every assessment that we did was management of keys and rotation of keys. So if you look at cloud infrastructure, the way engineers access different systems isn't logging in through a front end like you would think. It's typically they're assigned a key like an SSH key, and they can go directly to a machine and work all in like the black screen. That's how they do it. And assigning those keys rotating those keys, addressing those keys if they're compromised is a disaster. It's really hard to do. There's tools that do it, but organizations struggle with this all the time. So if you're doing third-party risk management and you have that really cool SaaS startup that we've audited about 1,000 of, they're probably not doing that. So that's a good question to ask. How are they managing that? Because that's where the keys to the kingdom live. That's where engineers are getting access to all of your production data. And then service account management is notoriously hard too, because you have an account that you use set up so two systems can talk to each other. Then they lose control of what that system was for, why does it exist? So that's difficult too. These are really easy audit plans where you can add a lot of value. If you're a security professional, there's tools and technologies that can solve these. There's another QR code, feel free to scan it. But we have a lot of data out there. So we put out a ton of content as far as white papers and free YouTube videos on all of these topics. So if you scan that and go to YouTube, we talk a lot about expanding on access, talk about how it relates to different frameworks and some tools and techniques that you can do to manage it. But the low-hanging fruit to solve this problem, I'm going to keep saying, is inventory. What do you need to control most? Identity and access management. So think about things like single sign-on, multi-factor authentication. These aren't new concepts. You guys are well aware of them. But those are huge. They help a lot, especially when you have a huge number of systems or a growing number of systems. One that I don't see very much of that surprises me is enterprise level password management systems. So you have stuff like 1Pass or LastPass that a lot of people use personally, but organizations haven't rolled those out to manage your passwords elsewhere. So these are some easy solutions. There's also more complicated ones like rolling out Okta or some type of enterprise identity and access management tool. But then you have to make a lot of systems talk to each other, and that can be really, really difficult. Endpoint device security. This really means laptops, really. I mean, you could think about mobile phones and tablets and stuff, but your biggest risk, and what I'm really thinking about here, are your laptops. Laptops are most organizations' single greatest attack surface, because every employee is an area of vulnerability. Not that just the employee, but the device itself. And you have a lot of fads going on right now. They're not fads, they've been here forever, but just stuff that's popular, like bring your own device. So many of your organizations probably have some kind of hybrid ecosystem where you have PCs, you have Macs, maybe you have Chromebooks. And by the way, someone can go to Best Buy if they're a remote employee and buy their own laptop and set it up. So this makes it very challenging to manage the endpoint device itself. There's also this careful balance of usability and security. How much productivity are you willing to erode for security? That's not a security question, that's a business question. I know one of the problems I see a lot is managing key employees. So maybe you have a CTO or a vice president of engineering who really needs some kind of unique setup because they need to work efficiently or they need access to the production application or whatever it might be. Yet also, if they're compromised, that's the biggest deal in the organization. You see the same thing with executives that don't want a laptop, they want like a tablet or something. So you get a non-standard setup and it ends up being the biggest problem in the organization. So the good news is there's a lot of solutions when it comes to endpoints. This might be the most tool-rich problem to solve. So there's mobile device management tools galore. Most of them you can send to an end user, they can click a button and it will be installed. And then you can configure it to do everything you could ever dream of on an endpoint, to control all the configuration settings, to lock it down, to make it super secure. There's advanced endpoint management tools as far as antivirus. All this exists and it's fairly easy to roll out. The problem that you'll have to overcome is really the cultural problem. Can you get these tools on someone's endpoint? Where's the line between security and productivity? Are there privacy implications? Those are business problems that you're gonna have to work out with your organization. And I think that's why this is showing up so much for us. It's not that it can't be solved, it's that the business has made a business decision not to solve it for one reason or another, or for politics, they can't get it through. But as you can see in the headlines, this is how it happens. Think like a hacker again. So what happens? A very common way to get in. By the way, this is what happened to the poor lady who lost $366,052, come to find out, was there's a sales rep that had an Endpoint device that was a bring your own device. He was a very successful traveling guy. Ended up having the opportunity to meet him, very competent. But he had a device that was uncontrolled. And if you're a good salesperson, you rapidly respond to every email and you're on the clock all the time, which also means that you're very susceptible to any kind of email phishing scam. So someone in his network that was legit had a compromise. Their email was compromised. A legit email came from a known user with an attachment. He opened the attachment. Nothing funny seemed to happen, but it did happen. And his endpoint was compromised. On his local endpoint, there was an abundance of agreements. One of those agreements happened to be some routing numbers and PDFs that were being exchanged. And the attacker was so sophisticated that they were patient. They read all the emails. It was clear. Like they had the context. The way they were sending emails, it looked like it was legitimately coming from the user. And it was probably going on for a month or more because of a single device that wasn't managed. The best thing you can do, like I said, mobile device management tool set. Think about how you want to onboard users. What's going to be the requirement? What's the business case? You have to be able to make a business case for these things to the executive team so they're willing to do the right thing when it comes to information security and they understand the negative impact to the business. This was probably the most surprising result for me. 98%. That's virtually all. The other 2% we probably missed in the audit. And the funny thing about our particular client segment is that most of them are using like a modern cloud technology ecosystem, meaning they're talking about words like continuous development, continuous integration, DevOps, DevSecOps, the abundance of tools and technology to make security frictionless when it comes to engineering are in abundance at the places that we typically look at. The enterprise organization might be different because they might have a very traditional non-modern technology environment. But even amongst the engineers who tout the superiority of their process and technology had these kind of findings. Why? And by the way, they do have an abundance of tools. This isn't because we were looking at organizations that just hadn't bought the tools. Business problem. What do companies want to do? They want to get their product to market quickly. They want it to be better than their competitors. They want it to be more user-friendly than their competitors. And they want to win in the marketplace. What do they not have a tolerance for? Poor usability, additional steps to log in, slowing down a process to implement information security. So these are business problems. You need a security executive at the helm. They make a business case why it's important to integrate security in the engineering process. And if you can't make that business case with a straight face, then you need to really rethink the security thing. It's going to be a problem. This is huge. By the way, if you're a large enterprise organization, this is a great vendor management questionnaire. Like walk through this process. Because our particular client sets, the high growth tech SaaS companies that you want to hire to do cool stuff in cloud systems, and they're having a lot of problems. But the good news is there's an abundance of tools. So what needs to be thought through is how to integrate information security as seamlessly as possible into the SDLC. We do have clients that do this remarkably well. It's incredible what they've been able to do in terms of integrating security with a click of the button. You'll talk to engineers and they don't know they're doing security. They think they're just following a process and doing good engineering, but there's security every step in the process. This might be the most important QR code you can click on. So we have this white paper out there where we walk through the entire DevOps process and DevSecOps process and talk about exactly where you can integrate information security seamlessly, and a few tools for each step. So if you're thinking about redesigning your SDLC and you want some advice around that, this is a great white paper for that. Or if you're designing an audit program and you want to start thinking about what those controls could be, what the categories could be, and what types of evidence you might need to ask for, this could set you up for success there. So a couple of honorable mentions that didn't make the list of the top 5 or 6. Cryptography, I already talked about. Our number one most common finding was around key management. Incident response, companies really struggle with it. What do you do when something happens? What scenarios should be included in incident response? How many of you have sat in on a tabletop that didn't quite hit the mark, but it met the compliance check the box? How many organizations have PR firms pre-engaged, have a law firm pre-engaged, have a security operations center with playbooks? How many people have had events that had that high-powered MSP that's supposed to be monitoring everything but didn't, or something fell through the cracks? This is a big problem. BCP and DR, so that's business continuity and disaster recovery. Can you recover your accounts payable processes if you have key systems go down? Like, what does it even take to recover an accounts payable process or accounts receivable process? What about your accounting and finance function? What about your HR function? That's the business continuity side. I would say there's a lot of attention on recovery, less attention on continuity. We've beat this one up as auditors. Vendor management and supply chain, still a huge issue. Are you looking at your third parties downstream? I don't know if you guys recently saw one that hit close to home for us, but there was an incident with a mobile device management tool called Kaseya. It's literally a security tool that you put on your laptop to enhance security. Well, a certain version of that had a compromise. So you're talking about the tool you implemented for security now has a security issue. And no one buys Kaseya directly. They buy it through an IT vendor. So you're talking about a fourth party that specializes in security that was the cause of an incident. How do you even manage stuff like that? But supply chain's huge. Some homework. So there's some emerging concepts that you'll probably get tired of hearing, but I think some of them are legit. Zero trust, hearing a lot about that, machine learning and artificial intelligence. Those are definitely emerging topics that are important. Blockchain, something that, and decentralization. So not the cryptocurrency, not Bitcoin, but the blockchain technology and its ability to decentralize data centers and how that's going to change. Right now we're all into the cloud, a centralized model of data. This could be a decentralized model of data, and that'll definitely have implications when it comes to information security and continuity and a lot of that stuff. Pay close attention to that. And the last thing for some homework is deception. In the spirit of thinking like a hacker and them having known playbooks, war is deception. Meaning, does your organization have honeypots? Are you predicting how a hacker is going to come in the organization, if they're going to go left or if they're going to go right during the hack? Are you tricking them to go right instead of left? There's what's called red and blue teams, so internal hacking teams that think about this stuff all day. And if you think about the folks who, if you listen to any talks on pen testers who really, really know this game and they know the bad guys and the good guys, they're talking a lot about deception right now. And that's something that I've never heard any auditor talk about. Rarely have I heard a security personnel talk about that. So all good pieces of homework. Fun facts. So y'all can get copies of this presentation later if you want to. But we do a lot of ISO certifications, SOC 2 reports. We do a lot of privacy around GDPR. And just for fun, I was curious, what are the most common findings that we see? And this is how they landed. So you can take a picture of it if you want, or you can grab the presentation after. I'm going to leave you guys with something after Q&A. but I'll pause here. Are there questions? And there's a big light here that I can't quite see, so if someone's raising their hand here. let me know.
Yeah, we've already got 2 questions online. The first
Ooh.
one you've already answered. Perfect timing. Literally, will we get a copy of this presentation? Second question, what solutions do you recommend in the DevOps world around developer access to production to enhance security with change management?
Developer access to security. Well, it depends. There's a lot of places to think about access. So one place to think about it might be the infrastructure. So if you're talking about, like, let's say AWS cloud infrastructure, there's an identity and access management tool set built into AWS where you can control access at that level. There's also an abundance of other tools that you can look at, but that's one. AWS also has something called key management system, or KMS. So if you want to manage those cryptographic keys, that's a tool you can use. Another level might be access to source code. So how, when they're programming and doing their thing, they're deploying source code somewhere, they're editing it, etc. How do you control access to that? So it's kind of tool dependent. If you're using something like Microsoft Team Foundation Server or Microsoft or Azure ecosystem, there's built-in tools there. If you're using something like GitHub or GitLab or any Git repo, there's built-in tools there as well to manage access. So it's going to be largely tool dependent. So you're going to want to do an inventory of what those tools are and find out what solutions best fit there. The key concept there is just know that there's no one access. You're going to have infrastructure, you're going to have source code, production data, probably databases, and then the servers and infrastructure can each have individual access. So there's a lot of layers to think through. So that's a little bit of a non-answer, but think of the layer you're thinking about and look for the tool specialized based on your technology stack.
Thanks so much. Any questions in the room? Feel free to raise your hand.
I must have nailed it. The slide's down, but I'll tell you guys anyway. So one thing that we do is produce a ton of content. I've already alluded to that. But if you guys want more information like this, we upload YouTube videos like every day. So they're already broken out into playlists. Like if you have questions about access, or you have questions about ISO 27001 or SOC 2 or whatever you want to have questions about, just go to YouTube, search for Risk 360, and we have playlists going all the time. And if you send us a note and you want us to create some content, we'll do it. We'll create it about whatever topic. If you want to know what tools to best look for access in AWS, we'll create that content. We also have a ton of white papers out there that address questions just like that. And we also have a podcast that we do every week where we talk to security executives or business owners, and they talk about trends and what's going on in the ecosystem. And that's a really good source of information. So if you guys are looking for something a little broad, that's good. But check out those YouTube videos. You can listen to them. You don't have to look at my face while you're working. And hopefully that's a good source of information for y'all.
Great. Thanks so much for
Thank
sharing.
you.
We
Thank
appreciate
you
your
all.
time.